With corruption matters almost daily, including today, cases of corruption are making the headlines. But just under a month ago, the government of Kenya and the government of the United States made pledges and agreed on stringent measures to stem runaway corruption. So how are these measures going to work? Tonight, the U.S. ambassador to Kenya, Robert Godec, will speak to Smriti Vidyarthi on that. But first, a check on some of those agreements. Now, the two governments committed to deepening their partnership and to work together. They plan to meet quarterly to review progress in implementing commitments, and the Kenya government has pledged to institutionalize integrity and anti-corruption mechanisms in all facets of government, and as said, it will implement and reinforce international anti-corruption initiatives and standards. The government of Kenya has committed to leveraging technology to reduce or eradicate opportunities for corruption. It is committed to finalizing the government's complaints and corruption reporting web portal for citizen use by December this year, and it has also said it will sustain its commitment to conduct thorough investigations into corruption cases and, where investigations produce sufficient evidence, to professionally prosecute such corruption cases. Now, these are just some of the agreements made between the two governments, but now Smriti Vidyarthi has more with Ambassador Robert Godec.
I certainly do, Gladys. Thanks very much indeed. With me is the U.S. Ambassador to Kenya, Robert Godec. Thanks very much for joining us. No doubt it's been a very busy time for you. Now, President Obama left many Kenyans feeling inspired, optimistic and confident, particularly when he spoke about the need to fight high-level corruption. Now, as we saw, Kenya has made several pledges and commitments to curb corruption. Now, that's all very well. But I suppose the concern really is if Kenya fails to meet certain deadlines and fails on some of their commitments, is the United States government going to take action against the Kenyan government?
Smriti, first, thank you very much. It's great to be back at NTV. President Obama was very, very pleased to be able to visit Kenya, and he was deeply appreciative of the very warm welcome he received from certainly President Kenyatta, but so many different Kenyans that he had an opportunity to encounter. I know he thinks it was a great visit. I certainly think it was a great visit. It was a wonderful opportunity. There were any number of different agreements that were reached around security, certainly around economic matters, but also, as you say, around corruption. So the government of Kenya and the government of the United States, really President Obama and President Kenyatta, entered into a series of commitments, really pledges by both sides, by both Kenya and the United States, to address the problem of corruption. And we all know it's a huge problem. It's undermining Kenya's future. It will, at the end of the day, undermine security, undermine job creation, so many other things if it's not addressed. And this pledge, this series of commitments, I believe, will help Kenya to do that.
So therefore, if Kenya fails to meet certain deadlines, because in that announcement or statement it does indicate that there are some deadlines that Kenya is expected to meet, if it fails, who is going to be held accountable? Who is there perhaps a watchdog or oversight to ensure that not only Kenya but the U.S. as well sticks to these pledges?
Well, I think in the first instance, obviously, we're going to work together to meet these commitments. They were undertaken by our two governments in all seriousness, and we intend to implement them. And I'm certainly very hopeful that, and believe that the government of Kenya will do so as well. At the end of the day, for example, the government of Kenya undertook by July of 2016 to digitize the records for births and deaths and land. It's a key commitment. So, you know, I look forward to the government of Kenya meeting its commitments.
All right, and I suppose if it doesn't, then we will deal with that hurdle as and when we get to it. How optimistic, though, is the United States that Kenya really will win this fight in corruption? Because just today, for example, we saw there's corruption in the traffic department. A couple of weeks ago, the Chief Justice was also shocked to learn and reveal that, in fact, there was corruption in the judiciary amongst judges and magistrates. And at the judiciary, that is where justice ought to be our shield and defender.
Corruption is a huge, huge problem here. And I absolutely believe that Kenyans can win this fight, that they can end corruption. But it's really going to take an effort at all levels. I mean, obviously, President Kenyatta has taken a number of steps recently. for example, suspending some government officials, some cabinet secretaries from their positions over allegations of corruption, insisting on investigations, and we welcome those steps. More needs to be done. Those efforts need to be sustained. There need to be thorough investigations. People need to be prosecuted where there's evidence, and then where there are convictions, people need to go to prison. And at the end of the day, though, this has to be everybody. It has to be all Kenyans. Kenyans across the board have to stand up and say, enough is enough.
Well, I believe that several Kenyans have said that at this point. Another major concern, however, is the issue of terrorism and the link between terrorism and corruption. That is a big concern because we know that right now several countries are facing the fight against terror as well. But there is certainly that link that corruption is perhaps fueling terror.
I don't think there's any doubt but that if you've got a corrupt police force, for example, that there is a risk that maybe they'll overlook something, maybe a bribe will be paid, maybe people will be let into the country when they shouldn't be. So yes, absolutely, corruption can undermine security. It can also mean that there's substandard equipment that the police or the security services have. So there's any number of ways that corruption can damage security.
How is the United States helping in the war against terror? We do know that in fact they are helping with monetary funds and perhaps other resources as well, but can you pinpoint certain ways that it really is aiding in this fight?
Sure. I mean, in the first instance, obviously we're working with AMISOM, which includes Kenyan troops inside Somalia, to address the problem where it originates, which is in Somalia with al-Shabaab. That's where the most immediate threat to Kenya is. And so we are providing a lot of support in the fight up there. Here in Kenya, we are ramping up our assistance. It will this year be $100 million US, so 10 billion Kenya shillings. We've provided any number of different things. We've provided aircraft. We've provided patrol boats. Every year we train hundreds of Kenyan security services. We work with the Kenyan prosecutors. We work with the courts. We do any number of different things that ultimately I think can help Kenya address the threat from terrorism.
Now the opposition is a party that believes that the Jubilee government isn't doing enough to fight corruption and also terrorism. Now President Obama passed a remark about a meeting that he had with the opposition leaders that then got many people wondering really what was discussed between the opposition and President Obama. Can you divulge information on that?
What I can tell you is this. President Obama frequently, when he goes to countries around the world, he meets with the opposition leaders. He also invites opposition leaders to the White House to meet with him there. And he did meet with opposition leaders here in Kenya. He held a brief meeting. It was a cordial exchange. It was a productive exchange. It provided an opportunity for the opposition leaders to voice some of their concerns, which President Obama listened to. So it was, I think, a productive and useful meeting and an opportunity for President Obama to hear directly from the political opposition.
What is the relationship between the U.S. government and the Kenyan opposition, if at all?
Well, you know, the United States talks to people, you know, around the world. We talk to government leaders, we talk to opposition leaders, we talk to civil society, we talk to business, we talk to religious leaders. We try to engage with everybody because we want to, first of all, hear from them, know what their concerns are, understand them, and also offer our own perspective. And so that's the sort of thing that President Obama does, that's the sort of thing I do, that's the sort of thing U.S. government officials do all over the world.
All right, now of course President Obama was in Kenya primarily because of the Global Entrepreneurship Summit, which many hailed as a success. When though, how soon are we likely to see some of the gains and fruits from that summit?
Well, we've already seen some of the gains because during the course of the conference there was announcements of more than $1 billion US worth of new funding for entrepreneurs. And this was a combination of government commitments and private commitments, foundations, banks, others. And so that wasn't just for Kenya, but a big portion of it will go to sub-Saharan Africa, and certainly some of it will go to Kenya as well. And that will go to support entrepreneurs as they set up their businesses, as they try to get going. So that's one thing that will happen. But clearly, one of the big benefits of the Global Entrepreneurship Summit is the linkages that are built between entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs with potential mentors, with financiers, venture capitalists. And so I do think you're going to see across time a lot of benefit for Kenya.
All right, now of course the United States media is independent, but Kenya was rightly so very offended by CNN's tagline that Kenya is a hotbed of terror and that the president was visiting Kenya. Now just recently the Tony Maddox, that is CNN's global executive vice president, visited Kenya to personally apologize. What does that signify to you? And really, do some of the US media still view Kenya or Africa as an impoverished nation, or continent rather?
Well, you know, I think that obviously media does a lot of reporting. Sometimes the stories are accurate, sometimes the stories are not accurate. So I think certainly CNN coming to say whatever was said was a positive thing. At the end of the day, you know, Kenya does face challenges in the security area. There are issues, there are problems, but I certainly don't think that Kenya qualifies as a hotbed of terror at the moment.
All right. Of course, now President Obama, as I said earlier, he left Kenyans feeling inspired, and he left Kenyans with a sense of hope. How can we ensure that that hope doesn't fade now that he's gone?
Well, there's a lot of things we can do. We can start by implementing all of the agreements, whether they be on corruption or security or other areas, and so implementing those agreements is job one, and I certainly am going to be working to do that. There's a lot of things coming up. We have trade delegations that will be coming in the course of the next few months. We have other visitors. So there are going to be a lot of different ways in which we can deepen our relations. You know, frankly, though, part of it is the relations aren't just government to government. They're business to business. They're universities. The University of Nairobi alone has more than 50 American universities as partners. So there's a lot of different areas that we can emphasize, a lot of places we can work to you know, keep the spirit of President Obama's visit alive. And I'm certainly committed to doing that. All
right. Well, thanks very much for your time. Appreciate that. And no doubt many other Kenyans do, because we haven't heard from you here at NTV since Obama's visit. So pleasure to hear from you. Thanks so much. All right. Joining me in studio, Robert Godec, the U.S. ambassador to Kenya, speaking about POTUS's visit here to Kenya. You are watching NTV Tonight. We're taking a short breather, but here's a little bit of what you can expect.